developers. Very excited to welcome you to our all access presentation this week. We're incredibly excited that so many of you have chosen Team Wolpers to be your training platform of choice over the next many months while you train for all sorts of races of different distances. We are so happy to bring a little bit of what we think is so important in one-on-one coaching to the group, which is that athlete-coach relationship. So hopefully these presentations every 2 weeks will give an opportunity for you to get questions answered, to bring questions up for the group, and for us to be able to share that answer with a lot of different people. So today, as I mentioned, Coach Carly is with me again. Many people are familiar with Coach Carly if you've been here for previous athlete briefings and the Spring Run Challenge. But just to do a very quick blurb, Carly is an exceptional athlete, a practicing doctor of physical therapy in Rochester, New York, as well as a very excellent Team Wolpers coach. So thank you, Carly, for being with us. And for one, know that I will be excited to hear your answers to a lot of these things, as I'm sure others will be as well.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so we don't have a week to talk about because we have everybody's week to talk about. So we get to jump straight into questions right here in the first format of this, which is going to be kind of strictly Q&A. We've gathered most questions. If questions come up over the course of time, I'll do my best to keep an eye on the comments section. So feel free, a little bit different than kind of our kind of previous athlete briefings, to throw some questions out there. And like I said, we'll do as best as possible to try to incorporate them into the conversation here today. So question one, and I'm going to go right to Carly here. So I'm training for my first marathon in January of 2024, currently doing the summer challenge with strength. Right now I'm doing 3 runs per week plus strength. Would you recommend going to 4 runs a week or when I start the 18-week marathon program? And so a little caveat, Carly, the 18-week marathon program, I believe that they've selected here, does have 4 runs a week. So just to kind of frame it a little bit and kind of open the question up, we're talking about an athlete running 3 times a week. At some point here we'll be running 4 times a week, but I thought it was kind of an interesting way to phrase it of, is there an amount of runs per week? We'll start with a marathon that you think is sort of like your baseline.
Yeah, of course. Again, my ultimate answer kind of depends, but for somebody starting into a marathon training, again, if it's their first one, and it's something that you haven't done before, starting this far out, again, January is pretty far away, thankfully. So it's
Yeah.
one of those that starting this far out, it's not maybe, again, wait until 4 months out to add that 4th run in if you're new to running. And it's not something you've ever done before. If you've never run more than 3 days a week, again, maybe kind of make sure 3 days feels comfortable first. Make sure the mileage of that you're recovering well between each run, and then you could add that 4th day in. Again, if it's something you're feeling really good, 3 days is easy, you're taking the other days off, then yes, you could add that 4th day. And if your legs feel good, but again, I wouldn't say it's a rush if you're running and not running a marathon until January. And I would say if you're new to running, especially, it's kind of like there's no point in pushing the limit now and risking injury if you're feeling good with the training you're doing with strength training and other things like that. If you're experienced to running, you've run some races and training plans, you can run 4 days a week and you don't get hurt. Great. Maybe add that 4th day in just to kind of test the waters, see if you can tolerate that mileage so that when you get into marathon training, you feel more confident in it when you're closer. But again, kind of depends on who you are. Kind of depends on if you've never trained before and that kind of thing. But
Sure. Agreed all around. So many of these answers, and I'm sure it depends will not be this will not be the last time we use it depends as an answer to a question.
unfortunately, not.
I'll always kind of say, like, I think 3 is the minimum amount of times a week. Like, you can do something to really have a reasonable expectation to get much better. If you're doing something less than 3 times a week, it might advance a little bit, but there's too much time between sessions to really do much else.
I would agree with that.
That being said, more is not always better. So for athletes, especially that are maybe newer to the sport, injury prone, 3 sessions a week might be a real sweet spot. And then especially like using the extra days of the week to do something cross training wise or supplemental that you could add in across the spectrum of that. I'll share the story often. One of my most successful athletes of the last 5 years She came to me. She's a Boston Marathon qualifying runner. She's an Ironman finisher, etc. She told me very early and quickly that she had had an injury history anytime she went over 3 times a week. So she has set PRs in every race distance, running 3 days a week for years. And she is, I say, consistent, like the sun rising in the morning, that she is going to get those 3 sessions in each week. And she's going to supplement really hard with her in particular, cycling and strength training. There are other ways. On the flip side of that, I do think for people, let's kind of just kind of flip things around a little bit. If you are really going for performance gain in the marathon, in particular, the marathon, it is a long race, and there is a volume accumulation that is required to really start to race the marathon. I'll kind of talk with athletes a lot that there's a big difference in like running a marathon and racing a marathon. And there's really probably only a small percentage of people who are really going out and racing a marathon. And if I had someone who came to me with like huge time goals, part of my strategy absolutely would have to be a little bit of volume accumulation. And to get that volume accumulation, it really helps to have the more sessions. So going all the way back to what Carly said, it always depends. What's your training history? Have you been running 4 days a week forever? Great, it's gonna be very easy. Have you only been running, are you new to running? Are you like at that 2, 3 times a week? In which case, maybe hold off a little bit, really nail that 3 days a week for, a couple months, adding some, supplemental training in, and then start to tackle maybe a fourth run.
Yeah, and I was gonna say experience, history, and goals. Like I feel like it's one of those like you're correct. If you have a time goal and then like a pretty aggressive goal, volume is the way to get that base cardio system strong. So it definitely again kind of depends on where you're at, but using those three things, like do you have an injury history? Take that into account. Are you a newer runner? Take that into account. Do you have a time goal? Take that into account. So I think, yeah, there's so many different factors, but don't stress. I know a lot of people are like, I'm only running this many miles a week and I'm training for a marathon. Like, you're this many and that person's this many are going to be different. So don't stress, don't compare yourself. Just do whatever, again, based off of your body.
Yeah, and just as I'm intimately familiar with these plans, all plans from beginner to all the way through advanced, I only write plans with 3 key workouts of the week. So the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh workout potentially of the week is always going to be more endurance training. So
Mhm.
3 keys are always there. Everything else becomes additional. So don't feel like are missing some critical workout. I mean, it's all important, but it's not. You're not missing any, of our key workouts by doing a 3 run versus a 4 run. So next question here is, I'm curious about your advice when it comes to vacation interrupting your ability to stick with your training plan. So this is going to be applied to a ton of people as we're here in the middle of summertime. And this particular question said, particularly about 2 to 3 weeks before the race, assuming that I won't be able to always get my long runs in on vacation. So we'll start with the overarching, Carly, I know this is something we all deal with ourselves, with other people. 18, 20 weeks is a very long period of time to just like put your
Yes.
life on hold for a training block. So maybe talk a little bit about incorporating planned training breaks into your key season planning.
Yeah, I would say again, plan ahead. So I know you never know, right? Just that sometimes travel does get popped on your schedule. But I always ask people, like, this is one of the first questions of coaching is when's your planned travel throughout your training block? Because it is one of those where it can be planned around to make it the least stressful. It could be a planned down week. It could be a planned like, hey, maybe during the week that week you get like a medium long run, and that's your longer run for the week, and then the weekend can be recovery, and you can shift things around. So I would say as long as you plan for it, it's one of those where it's like a very manageable piece of the puzzle. Like, sure, if you take 2 weeks off at the peak of training and then you don't have the ability and you're missed a bunch of workouts and it's hard to make them up, then you adjust and you make the best of where you're at. Maybe you adjust your goal and see where you are. But I would say plan in the biggest sense of like make it a down week or say like instead of I don't know how again some people's plans go up for a few weeks and down, right? So it's one of those that maybe you try to go up one more week and then take the week after, maybe you flip 2 weeks and then take the down week the week you travel. Or I always try to make it some sort of a recovery week just so people aren't stressed. Again, unless you're like me, I love running on vacation because it lets you explore where you're visiting. But I think it's a matter of depending on what kind of trip and obviously where you are. So getting in what you can. I always encourage people to get it's over a week, like get something. It's over 5 days. Like just do something, whether it's a long walk with some stretching or just something to maintain the brain's neurosystem of like, hey, I'm still training. Like this isn't like
Mm.
shutdown mode. This isn't like I'm done training right now. But I would say plan for it. Make sure that you do have it as a part of your schedule and just make it a planned lower stress week on your training load just so you don't drive yourself crazy. And also take into account if some people are like, I'm going to be walking 10 miles a day because I'm going to be in Paris or something. And it's like,
Mm.
great, but take that into account too. Like, don't go run 9 miles and then walk for 9 miles and then wonder why your legs feel like crap the next day. Right. So take into account what kind of trip it is and just again, talking to your coach about it or thinking a little bit about it. For the situation this person said about 2 to 3 weeks before, my thought would be personally, I have many different athletes. Some people have a 2 week taper, some people have a 3 week taper. So I think first off is do you have one of those weekends, 2 or 3 weeks out from the race? Second off, take whichever weekend you do have and make that your last long run on that weekend that you can do at home. If you're gone 3 weeks out, maybe you do a down week and then you do 2 weeks. You won't need a 3 week taper because you just took a down week. So you
Yeah.
can do that longer run 2 weeks out. So I would say again, if you don't have 2 or 3 weeks, then again, 4 weeks out, you try to make it as long as you can. And then you just, again, the work's done at that point. Just try to keep moving a little bit. I would say don't sit for 2 weeks and don't not do anything. You're going to feel worse. But just plan for it, make it a part of your schedule. And again, make it so that it's a planned down, less stressful time. It's not worth wasting vacation,
Yeah.
stressing about it.
Couldn't agree with everything more, top to bottom. So the only thing I'll add is like a logistical thing, which is, I tried as best as possible to get like those detailed overviews in most plans. They're still missing on some of the short distance ones, but in particular, I think they're all there on the long distance plan. And the reason that I want to provide those is, with this kind of week to week style of training, which is our delivery mechanism, it's important, especially when taking on a long training block like this, to be able to plan around it. And so, if there's an 18-week training block and you have a 2 week, break, might behoove you to have a 20-week training block and to start the thing a little bit soon and know that there's going to be a 2 week pause in there somewhere along the way. Or as Carly said, you almost always when I write, it's 3 weeks up, 1 week down, 3 weeks up, 1 week down. It's not the end of the world as long as everything's going okay and your health is okay to do 4 weeks up. If all of a sudden then the next week is a vacation. I'm with
Yep.
Carl. I really like it when people stay active on vacation, but one, I will shorten the workouts significantly. Two, I'll remove the structure of the workouts because I also love running and exploring on vacation, but I don't always love running marathon pace or hill repeats when I'm in the middle of vacation. It's a little bit more of a leisure cruise, is what I'm going for.
Yeah.
So build it into your training block. It can be very easy, especially in marathon training, to all of a sudden be like, well, I can't run the 10 miles, so I might as well not do anything. But to Carly's point, running 3 miles or 4 miles so that your body kind of stays in its rhythm really, really, really helps on the return. So that was what I would encourage as many of you as to do as possible. If you find yourself in a location which there are plenty of which is not safe to run, then don't run. It's certainly better to stay safe, but otherwise, try as best as possible to stay a little bit active. It helps that return significantly.
I agree.
On a kind of little part B tangent to this question here, this is a question actually kind of pertaining to the challenge perspective, and actually I think it kind of works in like racing as well, which is I'll be out of town for a few days during the last week of the challenge. So if I had to choose one workout to skip in the final week, is it better to skip a run or a strength? And so, Carly, if you were coming into your race week, which in essence our 20-minute distance test end of the challenge, you were going to skip a run or strength workout, what would you go for?
Strength.
Yeah, pretty
Personally, I mean,
much.
it's just at that point you're not going to get gains from the strength. Like you're going to just again potentially break down your muscles. You're not necessarily building up to like get the power that you want from these strength sessions. So I would suggest skipping a strength. I mean, again, waiting on the strength, getting a little shakeout run instead if you have a time crunch. Again, it takes a couple weeks for any sort of power to build from workouts or from strength training. I can't get the right word, but it takes a couple weeks for that to even build. So like that's why the taper like is a thing. Like I think that's too like yeah, you're letting your muscles like recover and you're letting your body kind of decrease the load on it so you can get that cellular recovery before the race starts, but also like you're not gaining your muscles don't break down and build back in a day. It takes some time. So it's one of those things that since it takes that kind of since it takes a little bit, there's no point in just stressing your muscles more within 2 weeks before. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say is take the strength out of there if you can. Focus
Mhm.
more on an easy run.
Yeah, and as if people who've done the challenges many times kind of know, the last week of the challenges tend to be kind of a planned pullback on the runs, as well as it will be on the strength. So you're really, they're much shorter, they're much easier than the main bulk. You're really trying to kind of stay, just stay sharp until you get to the weekend to go do that 20-minute test.
Mm.
So our next question here, and this will be an interesting one. I have no idea where you're going to go with this, Carly, but it's so what resources do you all look for in terms of nutrition planning and advice during your endurance training?
Yeah, again, so personalized. That's one thing I've learned huge is it's so personalized. Like it's not like a it's nice. It's nice to talk to a friend who's like, this worked so well for me. You should try it. And you're like, great. That person's stomach felt really great doing that. Right. And you're like, cool, maybe I should just do that. But then also your body is completely different and you might not process it the same way at all and not feel great at all. And your stomach might hurt. And the second hard part about this question, which I appreciate, is you walk into a store and there's 900 options in front of you of something to take, and then you don't know what to do. A couple of things I feel like I would look into is like knowing you know yourself, right? So like, are you a salty sweater? Are you do you have you ever had symptoms on a run before? Like have you ever felt lightheaded? Have you ever felt like you get really tired after you've been running for an hour? Like if you've had these symptoms before that you know you deplete fast, those are a couple of things to know. Like you probably do need a more substantial caloric intake during a run versus like if people and I'm not saying it's good to run on empty, but like if your body is functioning okay with that, you don't need to stuff food into it to feel worse.
Mhm.
So I think it's just knowing your body. Again, if you are a salty sweater, you probably want more electrolyte heavy um, nutrition. In my again, I'm not a nutritionist. I'll preface all of that with this, but you might want more electrolyte heavy versus glucose heavy. If you're one of those where you know you start to get lightheaded, which again that could be electrolytes too, but you know it might be more of like I feel hungry. Then you probably want more again like just general fuel to like feel hungry with it. But I always say practice early when you're doing endurance stuff. Like I know you might not need it on your 8 mile run, but bring it. Like it's one of those where practice early before you hit your peak 18-mile run and be like, well, that didn't work. Oh crap. Right. So I always suggest people training for endurance events like right when you start upping mileage after like the base period. I'm always saying like start adding a nutrition in from that first 12-mile run and start finding the right groove of every 45 minutes, every hour, every 30 minutes, every 45 minutes. Again, everyone's bodies, metabolisms were all different. So start early and again, know your body. If you know you have a sensitive stomach, don't try the most complex fake sugar situation. Or personally, I try it before. It's just like a random I'll go for a 4 mile run and I'll try what I wanted to try and then go run it and see how I feel. Cause then I know on a 4 mile run if my stomach's gonna blow up versus a 14-mile run, right? So
Yeah.
start early, test some things. Um, I would say again, obviously talk to a nutritionist if a sports nutritionist, if you're having trouble finding out what to eat before, what to eat during, that's a whole nother thing is eating before is just as important as potentially eating during it. If you know you're not going to eat well during the run, try to eat something before. If you're a salty sweater, add a ton of sodium into whatever you're taking, but practice with it and practice with it early, in my opinion, because there are so many things out there. So, I remember when I took my first goo, I almost threw up. And I was like, nope, never taking a goo again. Never mind. Right. So, like, goos are not my thing. I do the honey stinger chews, for example, and I'll drink LMNT to get some electrolytes in. And in every marathon, I've only run three, but in all the longer stuff I've done, I've basically stuck with drinking. Like I know I'm better at drinking calories and drinking my electrolytes than eating them because I'm not good with the texture of goos or anything during while I'm running. So start early, try a bunch of things in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I agreed all around there. Only thing I'd add, there are kind of two strategies you can tend to take with most race courses as well. You can train with the thing that works for you, or you can train with the thing that's on the course. Um,
Mhm.
if you don't want to have to carry and deal with the logistics of
Great call.
transporting that stuff along the way, might be worth training with what's on the course. And the one kind of caveat I would throw in there, I mean, Carly nailed it on start early, and everybody pushes this off. We talk about it with everyone. Start early, 20 weeks, 18 weeks, do the midweek, and then inevitably we're 2 months out, and our athletes still have no idea what they're doing. And they're starting to figure it out. Not because we didn't bring it up, but you have to start early. Don't just save it for the long runs either. Yeah, use those midweek workouts. Start to incorporate it just in small doses. Because what I was going to say is, at a certain point, and it has to be a bit earlier than later, it doesn't matter anymore what it is. You just have to get used to it. So I
Mhm.
very similarly, like, there's not a lot to love about these gels. Some of them are like flavored enough to be interesting, but like on your third, fourth, fifth time, sucking these things down, like that enjoyment is long gone. You have to develop almost a tolerance for it. We call it stomach training, which is getting your body used to the things that you like really you chose. So if we're in an 18-week training block, by really the 10-week mark, I'm asking athletes to stop their experimentation and to kind of go with what they've been working with so they can start to get used to it, because you want to know how your body's going to respond. You want to know how your body's going to respond when you start pushing the pace, when you get into that tempo where it's harder to digest stuff. And if you're still trying things out and manipulating your strategy, it's going to get really, really hard to test it. So when you come race day, it's going to be much more difficult to feel comfortable and confident with what you have going in. Personally, like over my history of things, I did seek out finally like an athletic, a nutritionist, dietitian to take a look at like my overall kind of intra workout, but also just kind of day to day nutrition. Gave me some like macro nutritional guidance. Wasn't something I had like an ongoing relationship with, but I certainly had those. And it would probably be worth right now going back and reassessing as I'm about a decade older. And there's many things have changed since then. So a great option if you have it available, to seek out trained nutritionist and get some guidance there. But otherwise, I think hopefully this is helpful with just getting into your race nutrition and your training nutrition.
And I would say too, again, I hear this a lot from people is they're like, I don't want to hold a bottle or I don't want to do this. And it's like, well, if you're not going to hold a bottle, then plan either water fountain stops or which again is not race realistic unless again you're not going to stop unless you are, but full stop, bend over and drink out of a water fountain and then keep going. You're probably going to grab a cup, which I know someone just asked a quick question about, and I feel like we could probably cover. But practice holding again. I hated holding a water bottle, and I know when I lived it down in Hoboken in those hot days, and it was like I'm not going to be able to, even an hour, I'm not making it through without something to drink. So starts again. And as a PT, I hate the bottle because people get really stiff and then they run asymmetrical. That's a whole nother story, but it's switch hands, like start to recognize if you hold the bottle up too high, but practice drinking while you run. And again, you said it great to practice drinking when you run hard. Cause I know a lot of people say, I'll take my goo and then I'll do my tempo miles and I'll take it after I'm done because it's just easier. And I'm like, well, during the marathon, you're going to end up taking it while you're running. So practice doing it when you feel like crap to see what happens and let your body, again, as you said, learn how to take it in. And I know someone said, do people actually stop and walk or stop and like take a sip out of the cup? Drinking on a course is its own art of its own, in my opinion. And again, you can try to grab the cup, pinch it, and take a sip as much as you can. It's very difficult. So grabbing it again, slowly taking little sips at a time, still spilling half of it on your body. That's probably most of the skill set that happens. Again, I held water bottles. I hate, again, I know I don't like it. It's not my favorite, but even when I ran some of my fastest race, like longer stuff, I still held one. And again, I maybe either tossed it to somebody I knew on the course halfway through or they traded and gave me a new one. But so I would say kind of see what works best for you, but don't skimp out on like the long stuff. I just don't want to carry one. I'm like, okay, well, do you want to be dehydrated for the next 2 days? Like, carry one, make it a part of your plan. It's worth it.
There's a good question, actually. I was going to bring this up. You kind of touched on it. Do you recommend with athletes to like use someone on the side of the course to like do a handoff?
Um, Depends who you are.
Yeah.
If I sense that it's causing the athlete more stress, I will be like, nope, actually, that's not the great idea. Let's just buy an extra $10 bottle and you throw it when you're done with it, and you just grab what's on the course. So I think it depends on who you are. I think if you do, you just make it very specific: runners right, runners left, mile marker or street marker. Like in New York City, for example, I was like, I know my family is going to be at like first and 85th, and my runners left, and I'm gonna, when I start
Yeah.
seeing 80th, I'm gonna start going to the left because I know I'm gonna see him at 85th. So but the biggest thing that can end up is if you don't see them, people have conniptions too. So it's like if I know that people are like gonna be really stressed about not seeing them, that's when I like would say, don't worry about that. Then hold the bottle and maybe take water off the course, and then drink your like electrolytes or drink that halfway through to start getting that in, as you start to do. So um, definitely depends on who the person is, because again, it's not for everyone. I personally, like, I would bank on seeing my family, but I also could wrap my head around being like, okay, well, missed that one. Not the end of the world, but we're gonna figure this out. So, yes, and I know there are some courses that don't allow them. So that depends on what course you're on too. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
I've seen it. I feel like it's like a 50, I'm out about a 50-50 success rate of people like having a plan. They're like, no, my spouse swore they're going to do mile 18 on the south side. But kind of to your point, sometimes it's that like there was a street closure and you can't even get
Yeah,
there. So I tend to encourage people to like have what they need. And yeah, you can like maybe plan it, but like don't be counting on it
yeah.
for like the second half of your race, for sure. A little question that came in. We'll take a very quick snippet. Just what is your like pre-race dinner? I think marathon was it in particular, but we'll open it up. So your pre-endurance race dinner.
Just like the beginning of this nutrition question, it kind of depends on your body. I've heard some really wild things. Coach Jason Lacretz, he likes to eat sushi the night before marathons, and he runs like 230 something marathons. So like, God bless him, but could never eat sushi. But again, to each their own. Depends on what your body is. I would like to partially debunk the carb loading in the sense of carbs are good, still have some carbs, but like those are fast acting glucose. Like by the time you eat that at 6 o'clock at night and go to bed, and then you wake up the next day, like your body is kind of burned through a lot of that. And it's good still to have carbs. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a big proponent of like, don't forget about protein. That's a slower breakdown building block piece of like, again, food in your body. You're going to take in carbs in the morning. You're going to take a goo on. You're going to get your carbs. I just think sometimes carbs can make people weighed down, in the sense of like, I do think, again, pasta, chicken, and vegetable, like great, like make it a normal meal, make it what you usually eat. Don't skimp on the volume of it, obviously. Like I wouldn't overeat, but don't be like, I'm gonna have less like the night before marathon. But definitely as someone to practice it. Just like you're gonna practice your hydration plan, practice it when you know you're
Oh
doing your
yeah,
long runs the night
Becky
before.
Fox just nailed it. Said,
Yes,
do
practice
what you
it. You
do
want
on
it?
your
She
long
should be
run.
talking. Yeah, she should be talking up here for sure. Like it's one of those like practice that the night before your long runs. Wake up the next morning. I tell at least one run if they've never run a marathon too, but at least one run in the training block. Mimic race day. Same clothes, same eating routine, all that kind of stuff. Just to like see you don't want to have a new shirt on the day of, and then you're chafing all over the place, right? Like so, it's like practice it. Just practice it and know your body. If you've never eaten sushi before a race, do not eat sushi. That was not a suggestion.
For sure. We'll move on to this next one. This was in particular, so you got to put on your PT hat here. I think we got a couple PT here, and then pacing is our kind of in between question, which I really want to make sure we hit because there are a lot of good questions on how to adjust. But for this one, for Coach Carly, I'm struggling with fast paces due to pain and tightness and high hamstring and glute on the left side. So you've heard that one before. Right side feels like I'm a 30-year-old champion. I can run slow, just not fast. After researching with Dr. Google, I have an idea of high hammy tendinopathy, but it could be weak glutes, prior hip injury, remnants, overtraining, imperfect, etc. So we'll skip that a little bit. Do I pull back, strength train, roll, wait to see, or see a sports med doc, PT, hip ortho, chiro strength trainer, etc. So to loop back to the top, you got an athlete that comes in, has high hamstring and glute tenderness and tightness, single-sided, which is super common. What is the best advice you're giving that
Yeah, definitely don't run. Again, this is my PT brain. Definitely don't run to a sports med doc or ortho right away. That's not. It'll give you a label, as you found by Dr. Google. You might get a label, but you're not going to get a why. You're not gonna get why is my high hamstring happening. You just got, hey, it's high hamstring tendonitis. Cool name. Okay, cool, but you didn't figure out why it's happening. So a lot of the times, again, yes, people are very asymmetrical. Some people get really thrown off by that, but like our bodies are not symmetrical. We have like a heart on one side, liver, three lobes. Like we're not symmetrical. It's okay to have asymmetrical injuries. But a lot of the times for that, I would definitely look at form, especially because you have a correlation between two speeds of when your pain comes up. So it's one of those where slow seems to be okay, but it sounds like to me when you start to go fast, you're probably locking up or tensing up or over again using one leg to push harder than the other, and that's causing you to tug at that high hamstring. So form would definitely be one piece that I would probably look first at is watch them run and then watch them run easy and at a high speed just to see what's changing. If you run on the treadmill, whoever again, this person could try to do that and watch like videotape themselves going slow and fast, see what they see is does my shoulder come up? Do I clench my arm by my side? I have to drop my shoulder, or maybe my right heel doesn't kick up as much as my left. See if you can see an asymmetry happening because that can kind of cue you to try to like do a quick form cue. The second thing is yes, a lot of people when they tend to go fast tend to dump their hips forward because they're kind of like chest up, trying to run as fast as they can. Um, I think that is a huge cause of high hamstring issues in many people. Is it's mostly either the new rocker bottom shoes. Don't get me wrong, I love a good Vaporfly, but a good rocker bottom shoe. And then if people tend to again dump their hips forward, as in you feel like your whole pelvis comes forward, that tends to then pull up the posterior chain of your leg, pulls on your hamstrings, pulls on your calves. That's when people can feel their hamstrings and calves pull when they're sprinting. So I would technically say a little bit of try a form change while you when you feel it. Don't just immediately give up. I would say see what happens if you think about pushing with your left foot harder. See if you can activate that hamstring a little bit instead of pulling at it. I would not suggest stretching it. Do not stretch it. It's like a fraying rope. If you pull at something that's already pissed off, it's just going to keep pissing it off. So I would suggest, yes, heating it and like rolling out actually the front of your hip, and getting you to try something while you're running is step one. Is like, see, when I dropped my shoulders and I thought about pushing the ground behind me, going faster with each foot evenly, like push, 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 push. I felt like I could get my hamstrings back on instead of just pulling. But most people tense up and they get stuck and they just get out of control when they sprint and they don't know what their bodies are doing. So like dial it back in to try to see what is my body doing. The second thing is yes, I would suggest activating your hamstrings, but if you're going to do that, activate it with those hips in neutral. Make sure you don't feel like your pelvis is really tucked under you or rolled forward. Try to make sure you're kind of feeling that neutral core tight position, doing some sort of again just regular squats with one foot in front and the other, just something kind of a little bit asymmetrical to again asymmetrically strengthen those muscles. So first step is don't panic and just stop and freak out, which is that's instinct. But I definitely usually tell people to try something. If it's not a 9 out of 10, if it's not a 9 out of 10 pain and you don't feel like you're gonna die, if it's 9 out of 10, please stop. If you're not, like try to change something. The only way to know that you can't fix what you don't know is broken. So try to see if you can again change your form. I rotated a lot with my trunk. It helped get my hips to open back up. Try something to see if it helps first before panicking too hard.
Yeah. Yeah, this you nailed it, Carly. I mean, obviously, you've forgotten more about this than I will ever know. But for me, it's like this high hamstring glute. Not 100%, 9 out of 10. The first thing that comes to mind is like there's a forward, like a pelvic tilt,
Mm.
which ends up being a result of either hips or hip flexors that are completely locked down and or underdeveloped glutes. Like I don't know, is that
Yeah,
my
like tight low back. Again, if people are used to that
Mhm.
kind of,
Like,
I tell like a lot of
yep,
my
for
people that have
sure.
been pregnant before, like they get stuck in a pregnant posture and they never come out of it.
Yep,
So like that tight low back, like you said, tight hip flexors could just be pattern you've been in your whole life. You know, you never knew that you were.
totally. So, Carly, maybe I will always plug PTs. Maybe she's holding back from like seeing her PT as though it's not billboarding herself here. But I think getting in and seeing a sports physical therapist and a really incredible sports masseuse, like they have to be like a really incredible sports masseuse that really understands the body at that point.
Mhm.
What they can do is start to open up your hip flexors. Very difficult to do, in particular, kind of like psoas right there at the front. Very unpleasant. Manual manipulation is certainly the best way to do it. Over the course of a long term, my opinion, Carly would know better than me. It's you got to get in there and not strengthen the hamstring. The hamstring is probably overly strong, but carrying too much of the load. It's really strengthening the core and glutes, and the core not being just your abs, core being like everything from your rib cage down. That really needs to lock down. And so, actually, like here on the this is all access presentation, some of the the kind of run strength plans that are in there, which you can now apply to any plan. They're really great foundational things that Ryan wrote and developed to do exactly that, to work on fundamental kind of stability, core stability strength, a lot of glutes, a lot of hips, um, and really making that good. And then I think once again, Carly mentioned it, nailed it. Something that is almost newer thinking. If you've got tight hamstrings, the last thing you want to do is stretch them. It is, once again, Carly said it. You're taking a tight muscle and tightening it more. So naturally, the thought process is to like, this is sore, this is tight, I'm going to do some stretching. What you want to be doing, heating, rolling, being ultra gentle on that. So I'll actually have athletes go through a little bit of a complex where they roll their hamstring and then open their hip flexor, and then roll their hamstring and then open their hip flexor, just with a kind of plain old hip flexor stretch. And I'll have them do this 4 or 5 times in sequence before their run, to try to reset the pelvis a little bit. It's not going to happen immediately. It's going to take a lot of repetition to do this over the course of a long time. And then it's also going to take that strengthening component to eventually change it. But those are the things I would look into immediately, is, starting to relax that hamstring a little bit, open up the hip flexors, and hopefully it starts to, and then seek the advice of a very talented physical therapist.
I think too, it's very common. And this is why I preface this too. It's not being flexible is very sport specific to me, in a sense of like
Yeah.
having mobility and like movement specific to what you're trying to achieve is great, but like dancers and gymnasts need a different type of mobility and stability than runners do.
Yeah.
Runners don't, they need mobility. We need to correct, we need rotation, we need a lot of different mobility, like the lunge matrix stretches and stuff. But we don't need to be able to bend over with our head between our knees with our hands flat on the floor. That's actually a lot of lack of stability you need around your hips. You need those hamstrings to hold that pelvis underneath you to run efficiently. So it's one of those things where a lot of these things are taught. I actually like to say taught to my patients. Like it's a taut rope. Your
Yeah.
hamstring doesn't need to be pulled anymore. It's pulled actually at its maximum point, probably, and that's why it's starting to pull at the bone. So instead of pulling at it, let's start to again give it some lax there. Like let it relax. Let it, as you said, stop working so hard. Let it chill for a second. And that's the whole hip positioning, trying to think of it that way. Again, some people do need an incredible amount of stretching, if depending on what you want to do. But most people, it's like you need stability to be able to be strong. And I know everyone makes fun of runners' hips, right? Runners got tight hips. I always get it too. I can't touch my toes. But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, because as a runner, you need power and you need recoil and you need all of that. So like having stability from that is pretty important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, while you have your PT hat on, I'm going to go out of order here. And so, the kind of the last question that came in before we at least jumped on here, and we're going to loop back to pacing is where we're going to finish, because I'm super interested in your opinion. But question on tight calves: do you recommend stretching before and after a run, a longer stretch after, or small stretches throughout the day? So, just best advice on crazy tight calves, which plenty of us have.
Yeah, I was gonna say two things on that. First thing is on like regarding the stretching piece. I would always say like don't again. No, I'm not a big static long holder of a stretch, just because again, running isn't that. You're constantly moving, and actually living is like that. Usually, when we're up and moving our muscles, we're moving. We're not just like standing all day. So making stretches dynamic is something I'm pretty big on. For calf stretching, if you want to, I tell people again with any actual stretch is like find end range, hold it for a couple seconds and then come out of it. Find end range, hold it for a couple seconds and come out of it. Get your muscle and tendons used to moving through a greater range of motion. Because it could just, again, if you just hold end range and you pull at all those muscle spindles, fibers, you don't really know what you're pulling at anymore. And that's when it can kind of be again. Sometimes it creates more of like a active. You're like now you're trying to hold yourself up for 2 minutes trying to stretch there, and now you don't know what muscles you're using holding
Yeah.
yourself up.
And
So I would say
and the
keep it
video
dynamic.
after the lunch matrix stretch is, I believe, is the it's either after or two after, is the calf three calf matrix
Really
stretch.
gotcha. And I'm sure you
Uh,
step across, you go forward a few times, step forward, step to the left, like all angles, but move in and of it and getting your tissue used to moving through it. The biggest thing is that like let it move, don't tense up against yourself. Second of all, if you have sharp pain, I would not stretch again, not stretch through it. Just be careful with it. And the second thing is with really tight calves, and especially if it's chronic, you got to figure out why it's happening. You're probably a calf runner. You're probably spending way too much time running with your calves due to lack of hip use. Which usually I'd say if you have really tight calves, go stretch your hip flexors. That's something I usually tell a lot of people do. If you can't extend through your hip and push through your hip, you're probably pushing with your calf instead. So I would definitely do like that dynamic calf stretch, do some foam rolling, and actually more like get those muscles just to kind of loosen up a little bit. But then I would really kind of go to how do I get my other muscles to work harder so that I don't just keep getting sore calves all the time, and that's opening up your hips still. So just don't ignore your hips, even if it's just your calves that have symptoms.
Yeah. For sure. I had Jason. We're giving Jason a lot of shout outs today. Jason identified for me just last year that I was running much too much with dependent upon calves. I wasn't like driving my heel into the ground to push off the heel. I was just on my front foot. And I very successfully ran for many years, many marathons doing exactly that. There certainly can be some body blocks, some form corrections, but we won't go down that line. I am curious. I'm gonna throw out a couple just like popular treatment methods, and you can just give a quick yay nay. So we've got things that I hear all the time people are doing with their calves, like Theragun or Hypervolt.
Yes, as long as it's not sharp, that's fine. As you can tolerate.
Okay, ice.
No, no ice.
Yeah, it's pretty
Mostly
much like out. No, nobody's icing anymore.
ice slows down blood, not speeds up. You want speed up to loosen them up. So
Yeah.
ice is a big debunk.
Heat,
Yes.
compression.
Yes.
Yeah, I think. Did I forget anything? Is there another one we should do?
Foam roller, yes.
Yeah, foam roll.
But again,
Another
yeah, I think
compression.
the thing with the Theragun too is like, and this is the whole thing with all of this is just like if you can tolerate it. Obviously, like don't use a Theragun if you have sharp stabbing pain in your calf. I think some people just like again read Dr. Google and they're like, but they told me to, and it's like, no, don't. If you have pain, like don't do what that says. But yeah, I would definitely say like Theragun heat. Ice is probably just going to tighten it up more, so it might feel more stiff if you want to if you want to put ice and then put some Theragun on it after to get the blood flowing again. That's up to you, but I'd never suggest ice alone.
Yeah. Calves, I love compression, heat. So compression, hot bath, Epsom salt, and rest. That was probably the last one. One question that came in, Carly, I think would be interesting to hear you talk about, and then we got to actually finish with pace here, which was, we'd love to hear Carly talk about more pushing off the back foot on the back half of the stride, been focused on front foot landing, wondering if my form on the back end is lacking.
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus on foot strike far too much because I like to tell the reason your foot strikes where it is because of like your posture and your mobility and momentum. If you can't open up your hips, you have to reach in front of you to propel forward because you can't open up behind you. So I tell people a lot of the focus again, if you're trying to run forward, we all should be kind of leaning forward just slightly. So pushing the ground behind you is probably one of the biggest blanket cues I can give you, or pushing the belt behind you if you're a treadmill runner. But thinking a little bit about pushing the ground behind you helps initiate that kind of hip rotation and extension, especially if you start to feel like you're stiff. Everyone then always comes back with, well, now I'm going really fast, and then it's a fine art of how do I get myself to keep my hips open but still go a little bit slower. But I think a lot of people have this problem with like my foot hurts, so they go to an insole or they go to I have to change my foot strike. But your foot is striking where it is because of what's happening up top. What's happening with my hips? What's happening with this? If I can't again extend through my hip and then therefore push the ground behind me, I'm going to find a different way to propel forward. And then a lot of people just bounce on their calves and reach. So thinking a little bit about what's up top first, and then think about again pushing the ground behind you is more of a cue versus changing your forefoot or changing your foot strike because your foot's just a little victim there. It's not really what's happening.
Yeah, and the best way I've seen to change this, because it's very hard. Like I can look at my own stride, and like I know, like I could identify issues, and I could tell myself how to fix those. And it's gonna be very hard mentally to go out and like just make that adjustment. It's one of the reasons it's actually been very exciting in the challenges in particular. Carly and I think have talked about this in the past. Throw in these things like anaerobic capacity intervals and VO2 max intervals. How many of us are using anaerobic capacity, like the energy zone in sports often? Probably not that many. And in particular, when we're talking about like 5K and 5K, yeah. But the marathon, zero. You're not using it. But what you do in those short distance intervals, develop a ton of efficiency. And because the pace is so severe, you have to find some form. You've got to feel what generating power is like in your foot. You find a lot of that by running fast and hard. That you don't have to find that when you're just running easy all the time, tempo all the way up to threshold. So that's one of the huge reasons. It's actually a great transition in this next question of why long distance racers should also do short distance running, is to like find some of that efficiency. So this will take us right into our final question here, which is question is about threshold and VO2 max run. So this is a question that I'm riffing off to get to a bigger question. So the question is questions about threshold and VO2 max. If we were reaching a point and somehow in the interval where we need to stop or slow down, which is better? Slow down, maybe not hit our goal for the interval, or stop to take a 30-second break and get back up to speed. And is either okay? So I'm going to jump ahead of Carly on this one, and she can. I'll take it myself. Give her a break for a second, which is because I wrote these workouts. I have always an answer to this, which is for threshold, it's okay to slow down. So it's different per energy zone is the answer. Threshold, okay to slow down a little bit. We're talking about endurance pace that you can hold for an hour of time when very well trained. However, VO2 max, anaerobic capacity, neuromuscular power, which we have never touched on, probably never will. In order to train VO2 max, you have to go to VO2 max. In order to train anaerobic capacity, you have to be at anaerobic capacity. So it is very, very common for adult athletes to reduce the pace in order to complete the totality of the workout. We like completing things. We like to get that like check mark gold star, and we should. That's a great thing to do. But when you're training VO2 max, you're training anaerobic capacity, it is super important to go all the way to that pace. And your paces, especially in those, are based on your 20-minute distance test. So it's a performance test of a time you achieved. So we have a pretty strong understanding that that's a pace that is relevant for you. So what I would say is on the threshold, yeah, it's okay a little bit to dial it back. You still got to hang in there, learn what it's like. But when you're working at those higher zones, VO2 max, anaerobic capacity, what I would tell an athlete to do is go as hard as you can for as many intervals as you can. And when you get to the point where you can no longer complete the interval, you're done for the day. You can go into your cool down, nice, easy miles, add more time there, but that's what that workout's going to look like. Carly, anything to add in there?
No, I think again, that's what I would have said too. Is if you're first off, if you're not doing your first anaerobic or high end effort and you're not finishing it, you're starting off too fast. That's just not your pace. But like if you get to say you're supposed to do 8 and you get to 6 and you're like, I don't think I could finish another one, end it. It's not worth working a different system. That's not worth working that day. So definitely, and that's not doesn't mean you're a failure. Doesn't mean you didn't complete it. You completed the correct amount of reps for you, and that's what matters. You're training for you. So it's a matter of if that's how many you completed, and that's perfect.
Yeah, 100%. So this was actually the question that I thought we'd finish on, and I'm glad we are. So I'll preface it a little. Matt and I have talked over the course of time, and this is why I'm very interested, Carly, in your opinion, that we actually find one of the hardest things to do mid-training block is to figure out if and when to make pace adjustments. So 18 weeks, however, of a marathon training block is a lot of training. If in an 8-week structure, we're training, retesting and changing paces every 2 months. So it gives us an opportunity for multiple pace ranges. So I'm curious, over the course of a training block, let's say like a half marathon or a marathon, where, really extended, when you're working with your athletes, when are you thinking about either retesting, running B races, making automatic pace adjustments? How are you kind of handling that?
Yeah, I mean, I base it off what they've done. So I always tell people, and again, on Training Peaks, I ask people, like when I do my private coaching, I'm always like, write a quick little note underneath of how it felt. Was it hard? Was it easy? Could you have done more? This and that. Because I mean, we're strategically progressing each workout to make sense. And let's
Hmm.
say they do get to a point where they're like, this actually feels pretty easy now, or like this easy pace for me. I feel like I'm go by what they say and how they feel, go by the person. Again, I don't think there's a set time, right? There's not a set time in a training block at 6 weeks in. we change their paces, right? Because not everyone progresses that fast. So
Yeah.
I do feel like, yeah, having training races during the big block does help with that because you can always adjust once they've completed it. But I always look at workouts they have done, or if things they like, if they can do a 30-minute tempo run at marathon pace and I said that was really easy, then I'm like, okay, we have like we could potentially have, and then they recovered really well into the next week of training. Then
Hmm.
that's something that I would say like is something worth thinking about. Like maybe your goal is different than you thought, but if they're not hitting the paces that you give them and they're like, but this is my goal, and I'm like, well, we're setting you up for a miserable time if you're not hitting the paces, and that's annoying. People don't like to hear that, but would you rather have a good race or be miserable because you thought this was your goal, but none of your workouts added up to that? So I do always think there's some key workouts where like you can predict if they're ready for the race or if they're ready for a change. Like if you're trying to train for half marathon, you can do 3 by 2 mile or something like that, and then like, oh, like they totally can run the half marathon at that pace. But I always, but it's based off the person. I mean, if they're showing in workouts and they express the effort put forth is easier at that pace than it was a month ago, then again, you're seeing progression and also like building confidence that maybe you could push the limits a little bit more down the road. But obviously, just based off what they say and kind of how they what they tell you.
Yeah, agreed a ton. Just to add on, this particular question kind of said, I've done the 20-minute distance test, and I've seen this a couple times. And we kind of the way stuff is structured right now, that you have to do a 20-minute distance test to kind of set the baseline, and there's
Hmm.
plenty of good that goes along with it. But the longer the race, the less relevant that 20-minute test is for a retest. What I mean is that you can certainly still show improvement in the 20-minute distance test, but that tends to be kind of a VO2 max to threshold race. And for half marathon, et cetera, work in endurance, and it's probable that you lose a little bit of short distance speed when you spend 6 months working on building marathon distance or comparable races. What the best way, I'm going to talk about two ways. The best way that I have athletes adjust paces during training are B races. B race like crazy. Matt Fitzgerald and the Strength Runner podcast, they nailed it in this recent podcast talking about how to break through marathon plateaus and B racing. You got to put these smaller, shorter races in there, but they also become awesome opportunities to gauge fitness. There's nothing. I mean, most of my marathoners that are really going for time goals, I have them racing a competitive half marathon 4 to 6 weeks out from the key race. Like that's where I want them to go and race a half marathon to get a sense of what their pace is going to be coming into that marathon. But during the block, it's super critical. Like Carly said, you can run these key workouts. So for a marathon, if I couldn't have someone race, probably have them do as much as 16 miles at marathon pace. So we call it a metric marathon. See if they can hold it. That's incredibly difficult to stay motivated for by yourself. Maybe you can do it in a small group. A lot more fun to find a half marathon out there and go race it. So 10Ks, half marathons, excellent things to put in during your training block. You don't want to do them so often that all you're doing is racing, because you still got to get out there and train. You got a long run, but building those B races into your calendar and using those as a test. And there are pace calculators out there then that will help you adjust your threshold based on those race distances. We don't have it yet, so I'll have to send you elsewhere. If we want it, we can build it and we'll bring it back in. But that's the best way I would do it in the middle of marathon training. The other way, which I don't like, is what Carly mentioned, is if you have someone who has a very specific time goal and they say, I want to run a 3:30 marathon, and you look at the results of the 20-minute distance test, you have them run B races, and you're like, well, as far as I can tell, you are pacing for a 3:45. And I'm like, I can move these paces forward systematically over the course of every 4 weeks. But if you're not hitting the paces in workouts, you're not hitting the paces in races, when you end up eventually going out at that pace, it is going to be brutal. It is going to be a brutal finish to that marathon. So great question just came in. What is a B race? This would be, so we talk about an A race being your target race. So the big one that you're doing all your training towards. The B races are little secondary supplemental races, tune-ups, practices, things. We were talking a lot about nutrition and key training runs. Great opportunity to practice your full race kit, full nutrition plan, full breakfast before morning, full navigating of a starting area. These are all little things that they don't just come naturally of learning how to expedite your entire morning routine. Or if you're running a race like the New York City Marathon, you're up for 7 6 7 hours to get to that race start for 10 a.m. Going through a race process, even if it's a small race, even if it's a 10K race, it's going to help you be more comfortable when you get to those, your key race of the season. The other thing, and it's just mentally, it helps you prepare so much to go through the race process, to push yourself harder at a shorter race distance. So then when you get to your kind of a race, you're more comfortable. You know what running in a crowd is like. You know what drinking from a cup is like. Can you do it? Can you not? Do you need to carry a bottle? These are things like you don't want to be figuring out in the middle of your goal. You want to have your practice runs take care of that for you. 'Cause, marathon in particular, it's hard. You spend 6 months getting ready for this thing. You show up and like have the wrong breakfast and your day's done.
Yeah.
You can't turn around a week later and rerun the thing. You got to wait now many months to like kind of turn it back around. So those B races, I think, take the pressure off of stuff a lot as well.
For sure. I agree. It's all practice, right? So if you want to make a real race, some people don't like the race and they want to run, hey, I'm gonna go do it by myself. I want to run it. I'm like, okay, it's on you, right? You want to go run half marathon by yourself to see how fast you run it? Okay, we can take it with a grain of salt. But I do think, yeah, having something set up to help like get those jitters out before, it's definitely good practice.
Yeah, for sure. Any other final thoughts on just kind of pacing and how to pick, little tips or tricks of like finding your pacing in advance of marathon? I know you talked about in our last athlete briefing we did. You are a spot on negative split pacer at the marathon, so that's something I aspire to one of these days.
Yeah, I think it's just always remembering everyone's like the reason you do marathon miles in training is to learn what it feels like to run marathon pace. Like I think it's one of those that people forget that where it's how am I supposed to know what it feels like on well, that's the whole point. Get that feeling down. When you're in the middle of like your goal pace, like take a body scan, like see what this feels like. I feel what my effort feels like. I feel like what my stride feels like so that when you do your next workout, you go right back to that same feeling and you practice that feeling so when you hit race day, you know exactly what pace should feel like. And that's where I almost once I always kick myself when people are like, "Well, I felt like I got to the start line, and I didn't know what to do." And I'm like, "How did I not nail this home enough?" That again, it's like it's one of these. It's you practice it. You're doing it in every workout. That's the whole point. Don't rely fully on your watch. Don't rely fully on your friends. You rely on your body and your brain to feel the pace that you want to feel on race day. Don't rely on the treadmill. Sorry, unless you're running a treadmill marathon. But it's one of those where rely on your body finding the exact pace that you want to feel and then practice nailing it in and adding a little bit and tolerating that fatigue, etc. So it's all about like it's you. We do this to ourselves, right? So it's one of those like remembering that we can choose to learn what that feels like so we know what to do next time. And that will really help your body. You feel confident going to the start line being like, I know exactly what this feels like. I've done 50 miles at this pace at this point throughout the training, right? So it's just a matter of being able to have that confidence going into race day.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that is a perfect spot to end it. Carly, I think we did it. Thanks as always. It's
You're
always a
welcome.
pleasure to chat. I'm walking away feeling more enlightened already.
Me
I'm
too.
sure everyone else is feeling the same way. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and being part of All Access. We're so happy to start rolling this out, every couple of weeks here. So we'll be back with kind of a new version of this in a couple of weeks. Please keep the feedback coming in as we are learning and adjusting on the fly. So thanks as always for participating, and we will see you here soon. Thanks, Carly.
See ya. Thank you.